All right, the meeting has begun.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our workshop. I think we're just going to give a couple minutes for people to join because I see the number ticking up rapidly here. Well, good morning. Welcome to CARB's workshop on criteria for projects targeted in disadvantaged communities for the Omnibus regulation. We're just waiting a couple minutes to start, giving people time to get connected here to the webinar. All right, I think I'll give it one more minute and then we'll get rolling. Okay, let's get started. Um, I think I'm kicking this off. So good morning. My name is Kim Heroy-Rogalski. I am Chief of the Mobile Source Reg Development Branch at the California Air Resources Board. Thanks everyone for taking time to join us for this workshop today. We're here to talk about some special provisions in our Omnibus regulation that allow manufacturers to sell some engines certified to the older, higher emitting standard, and that those provisions are there to help enable a smooth transition to the new standards. And in fact, we just have proposed some amendments that would allow manufacturers to make a bit more of these legacy engines. But in order to ensure that all the emission benefits of the program are achieved, any emission increases have to be offset. And manufacturers are allowed to offset them with credits, or if they don't have enough credits or can't get enough credits, they're allowed to do projects in disadvantaged communities to offset those excess emissions. And the purpose of today's workshop is to give you our current thinking on how those projects would work and how we would judge them and what credit they would generate, and to get feedback and ideas from affected stakeholders about how we should set this up. I'm really excited to have this workshop today because not only are these provisions enabling a smoother transition to the new standards with less shortages and stuff, it's also a chance perhaps to be able to fund some really interesting and beneficial projects in the parts of California that need emission reductions most urgently. So with that, let me hand it off to Neva Lowry, who's the lead staff for this project.
Thanks, Kim. We'll start with Mitzi. I think you have some housekeeping items, and then I'll get started with the presentation. Thanks.
Sure, Niva. Thank you. So good morning. I'm Mitzi Magtoro. I'll be moderating the Q&A portion of this workshop. So I have posted the link of the presentation in the chat for anyone who needs a copy. And now I'll briefly talk about the logistics of today's workshop. So this public workshop is being recorded. Please make sure your display name reflects your full name and affiliation if possible. To rename yourself in the participant list, click on the participants at the bottom of the screen, hover the mouse over your name. The option to rename should be available. You can also join this workshop via phone using the provided Zoom dial-in. And then participants can ask a question or provide a comment after Niva's presentation. You can either put them in the Q&A box or by virtually raising your hand to ask them verbally. So raised hands will appear at the top of the participants list in the order they were raised. So when you're called in later on, click or tap the microphone icon to unmute yourself. So if you called in by phone, you can raise your hand by dialing number 2. When you're called on to unmute yourself, please dial *6. So before you begin your question, please state your name and affiliation. And I guess that's it for the logistics. I'll pass it on to Niva to give today's presentation.
Great, thanks, Mitzi. My name is Neva Lowry, and I'm lead staff for this item. I thank you all for joining today's workshop to discuss criteria for projects in disadvantaged communities to offset legacy engine emissions as per the Omnibus regulation. I'll start today with an outline of the presentation. So first I'll go over the purpose of the workshop, and then I'll provide some background on the Omnibus regulation and amendments, and then we'll review what is required in a project plan, and I'll talk about possible project types that we're considering. Last, I'll talk briefly about the proposal timeline, and we'll close out the presentation with some questions that we would like your feedback on. I think I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna turn off my camera for the rest of the presentation. I'll turn it back on, thanks. All right, thanks. So the goal of today's workshop is to communicate our initial concepts for offset projects in disadvantaged communities and to get your feedback on our concepts. We'd like to solicit input on possible project types and other project types that participants might suggest. We're also looking for input on possible approaches for infrastructure projects and quantifying benefits from such projects. Next slide. The Omnibus regulation was adopted by the board in September 2021. It set more stringent emission standards, as well as durability, emission warranty, useful life, and in-use testing requirements for 2024 and subsequent model years. For model years 2024 through 2026, Omnibus set a 0.05 grams per brake horsepower hour NOx engine standard, effectively reducing NOx emissions by 75% from the current 0.2 grams per brake horsepower hour legacy engine standards. For PM, the new Omnibus standard reduces emissions by 50% to 0.005 grams per brake horsepower hour. The regulation also included provisions to help manufacturers transition to cleaner engine standards. These flexibility provisions set a maximum percent of legacy engines, that is the engine certified to the 0.2 standard, that can be sold in California in 2024 and 2025, as long as excess emissions are offset in full. The legacy engine provisions also require that at least one engine be certified to the Omnibus standard. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, CARB reached an agreement with truck and engine manufacturers called the Clean Truck Partnership. One of the elements of the agreement allows an increase in the number of legacy engines to be sold in California for model years 2024, 2025, and 2026, as long as the excess emissions are offset. Another key element of the Clean Truck Partnership is that CARB prepare a manufacturer's advisory correspondence, a MAC, that provides guidance to manufacturers on how to pursue offset projects targeted in disadvantaged communities, and that such projects may include infrastructure aimed at facilitating use of heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles. And that is what brings us here today for this workshop. Next slide, please. Recently proposed amendments to the Omnibus regulation legacy engine provisions provide additional flexibility to manufacturers by allowing them to sell more legacy engines in 2024 through 2026. The proposed amendments provide two options that increase the number of legacy engines that can be sold, as shown in the table in the slide. The amendments also allow additional carryover flexibility. Next slide, please. This slide reviews the offset hierarchy. Before engine manufacturers can use mitigation projects in disadvantaged communities to offset their legacy engine emissions, they must first exhaust attempts to offset emissions using zero-emission heavy-duty zero-emission credits. If there's not enough heavy-duty zero-emission credits, then manufacturers must use credits from combustion engines in the same averaging set. Again, if there are insufficient credits, then manufacturers can pursue projects at disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. The legacy engine provisions provide the equation to calculate the legacy engine deficit. This slide shows that calculation and provides an example. The calculation takes the low NOx Omnibus standard of 0.05 grams per brake horsepower hour minus the legacy engine standard of 0.2 grams per brake horsepower hour multiplied by the transient cycle conversion factor and the vehicle useful life, and then converts the result to megagrams. In this case, a heavy-duty legacy engine has an offset deficit of 0.33 megagrams. Next slide, please. The legacy engine provisions require that the project benefit a disadvantaged community. Disadvantaged communities are defined by the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, OEHA, and are approved by the California Environmental Protection Agency. Disadvantaged communities shown on the map in red are designated by census tract. Each census tract in California is scored and ranked based on more than 20 environmental and socioeconomic indicators. Environmental indicators include measures such as PM 2.5 concentrations and drinking water quality. Socioeconomic indicators include measures such as poverty and unemployment. The census tracts receiving the highest 25% of overall scores are designated disadvantaged communities. This slide provides a link to a mapping tool where users can enter an address or latitude, longitude to see if the location of the proposed project lands in a disadvantaged community or not. Next slide. To determine benefit to the disadvantaged community, we look to the California Climate Investments Program. They have established criteria to determine direct and meaningful benefits to DACs. In the case of mobile sources and the supporting infrastructure, a vehicle, equipment, supporting infrastructure must be domiciled, registered, or operated a majority of time within the disadvantaged community. For buses, the requirement is it have at least one stop or station in the disadvantaged community. The idea here is that the bus provides a direct and meaningful benefit to at least one member of the community. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about project plan requirements. The legacy engine provisions require that project plans be submitted to CARB for executive officer approval. Each plan will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Plans must demonstrate that emissions are fully offset. Sufficient information should be included in the plan to recreate the claimed offset emission reductions. This includes the methods, calculations, factors, and assumptions used to calculate emission reductions, sufficient to recreate those emission reductions. Legacy engine deficits must be offset at a rate of 1.25 times. For example, slide 9 shows that a heavy-duty diesel legacy engine has 0.33 megagrams of NOx to offset. So in this case, a project must demonstrate emission offsets of 0.41 megagrams to offset that legacy engine. Any and all excess NOx and PM emissions must be mitigated. That being said, Omnibus is a low NOx regulation, and a key goal of a mitigation project will be to achieve NOx reductions. The project must offset emissions within 5 years from the emission reduction project, from when the emission reduction project is active. The plan must include the expected start and end date as well. And last, the plan must include a budget. Next slide, please. This slide provides information about 2 separate program documentation requirements. The first item is manufacturers are required to provide documentation substantiating their attempt to purchase zero-emission heavy-duty credits. To that end, manufacturers must check all manufacturers that certify heavy-duty zero-emission powertrains for available credits. If sufficient credits are not available, or the cost exceeds $4,000 to offset NOx or PM for a medium heavy-duty legacy engine, then manufacturers need to provide information substantiating their attempts. A list of manufacturers that certify zero-emission powertrains can be found on the CARB's new vehicle and engine certification page. I'll add a link to that in the chat after the presentation. The second item is related to the end of project documentation. The legacy engine provisions require that manufacturers submit information documenting that the offset emissions have been achieved once the project is complete and after the 5-year project period has passed. Next slide, please. So the next series of slides will focus on project concepts. I'll talk about infrastructure projects, Carl Moyer-like projects, possible on-road projects, and other project types that sound promising. I'd like to note that co-funding or project cost sharing is allowed as long as there's no double counting of offset emissions. For example, manufacturers might share the cost of a project with public incentives. Also, offset emission reductions must be surplus to any rule or regulation. That is to say that emission reductions claimed for an offset project must be either early, before it's required by the rule or regulation, or extra, go above and beyond what is required. Next slide, please. Infrastructure is an important part of California's transition to heavy-duty zero-emission technologies. This includes electric battery charging stations and hydrogen fueling stations that enable zero-emission vehicles to operate. Manufacturers have expressed an interest in funding infrastructure projects for heavy-duty vehicles, and CARB realizes that there's a significant need for infrastructure in the state to reach our cleaner goals. We would also consider infrastructure projects for other sectors, such as off-road or shore power. We propose that the infrastructure must be publicly available and that the project demonstrate that there is a need for infrastructure at the proposed location. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide provides possible approach to quantify emission reductions for infrastructure projects. I'd like to note that CARB has not approved any specific project type or methodology at this time. These are initial concepts under consideration that we're seeking feedback on. The A-Fleet charging and fueling infrastructure tool comes to us from the California Energy Commission. The CEC is the lead state agency for zero-emission vehicle infrastructure in California. The tool was developed by Argonne National Laboratory and sponsored by the Department of Energy and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. A link to the tool is provided on the slide so participants can open it and explore the utility. The methodology is based on displacing miles traveled with conventional fuel versus miles traveled with alternative sources. For example, the tool calculates emission reductions for the displacement of diesel fuel with electric kilowatt hours based on miles traveled. Users first select their state, and the tool provides default high, medium, and low usage values. However, user can change usage inputs for their specific scenario, so the tool is interactive. The A-Fleet tool calculates both criteria pollutants as well as greenhouse gas emission reductions, so it does quantify NOx. However, the tool attributes all of the emission reductions to the infrastructure itself. We'd like to solicit feedback on if and how these emission benefits should be discounted to account for the fact that some of the heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles would be operating even without the station, although the new station would enable early or additional use of heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles. Next slide, please. The Carl Moyer program is a well-established incentive program that funds a variety of source categories, including marine vessels, such as tugboats, locomotive projects, such as switchers, off-road equipment, such as scrapers, stationary and portable agricultural pumps, light-duty car scrap, and lawn and garden equipment. I think that covers all of them. Next slide, please. The proposal here is to borrow the emission reduction calculations from the Carl Moyer program for legacy engine offsets. The Moyer program has been successfully funding NOx reduction projects in environmental justice communities for more than 20 years and could serve as a source of potential offset projects in disadvantaged communities. The Moyer program is primarily administered by the local air districts, who evaluate the projects and ultimately select what projects are funded. In turn, CARB is primarily responsible for establishing the guidelines and for program oversight. The Carl Moyer guidelines provide approved and well-vetted quantification methodologies for all the source categories the program funds. The equations are published in Appendix C. The factors are published in Appendix D, and example calculations are also available through the Carl Moyer guidelines. I'd also like to note that these offset projects are not subject to the Moyer cost effectiveness limits, so there's no need for manufacturers to calculate cost effectiveness, capital recovery factor, or weighted PM for their projects. Next slide, please. So this is an example calculation for a locomotive switcher. In this case, a 1971 uncontrolled locomotive is scrapped and replaced with a Tier 4, which generates 9.21 megagrams of NOx reductions per year. When the annual reductions are multiplied by 5, the offset period, the result is 46 megagrams of NOx for this project. This example calculation follows the Carl Moyer methodologies, and a variation of this calculation can be found in the example calculations in the guidelines. Next slide, please. There may also be opportunity to fund on-road vehicle replacement projects. For example, vehicles that are exempt from the on-road in-use fleet rules, including the truck and bus and accelerated clean fleet regulations, could provide significant surplus emission reductions. Our initial concept here requires that the replacement vehicle must be at least a 0.1 gram per brake horsepower hour or cleaner engine, and the old vehicle must be scrapped. There can be up to 5-year offset period, which is half of the useful life. In this case, emission calculations would follow the legacy engine provisions for consistency, and this is the same calculation to quantify the deficit on slide 9. The baseline emission standards are provided in Title 13 of the California Code of Regulations, section 1956.8. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide provides an example calculation for a 1994 exempt medium heavy-duty snow removal vehicle. The calculation subtracts 0.05 grams per brake horsepower hour omnibus engine from the baseline NOx engine standard for 1994, which is 5 grams per brake horsepower hour, multiplied by half of the useful life and converted to megagrams. This example replacement here would generate 1.51 megagrams of NOx benefits. Next slide, please. The last project slide provides information on some other programs that could be funded in disadvantaged communities. The Supplemental Environmental Projects, or the SEP program, provides a list of CARB pre-approved projects that are typically paid for with enforcement settlement funds. Although manufacturer offset projects are not settlement funds, there might be an opportunity for manufacturers to find project ideas from the SEP project list. A key appeal of the SEP program is that these projects are typically implemented by a community group or air district. Manufacturers have expressed an interest in exploring projects that are implemented by a third party. Another promising program that targets projects in environmental justice communities is the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program, or CAP. This program works with select communities to organize and address the specific air pollution challenges at the neighborhood level. Each selected community develops a list of strategies to address their air pollution needs in the community. Further, there are upwards of 60 additional frequently nominated communities throughout the state that have a need for funding to reduce emissions in their neighborhoods as well. If you're interested in more information on these programs, please reach out to me. My email is on the last slide, and I can help you coordinate with the programs with correct contacts to look at these programs. Next slide, please. As noted earlier in the presentation, CARB will consider these project plans on a case-by-case basis. We anticipate initial review for completeness within 15 to 30 calendar days of receipt of the project plan. We anticipate an additional 45 to 60 days for complete review of the plan. I expect that the time it will take to review the project plan depends on the complexity of the project proposed. For example, if the project follows the Moyer eligibility and emission reduction calculation methodologies, which are CARB approved and published, then the review period would likely be streamlined, whereas more complicated or new project types might take longer to review. Next slide, please. So we have put together 4 questions that we have for the participants to stimulate conversation. And so I'll just read them quickly, and then we'll open it up for question and comments. So the first question is, do you have comments on the proposed project types or calculation methods that we talked about today? Second, what are other project types or programs we might consider for legacy engine offsets? Third, should infrastructure projects be allowed for other source categories such as off-road and shore power? And fourth, what other eligibility criteria should be required for zero emission infrastructure projects beyond the proposed publicly available and demonstrating a need requirements? All right, thank you. I think that concludes my presentation, and then I'll pass it over to Mitzi if you want to take over questions and answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Neva. So looks like we have one question in the Q&A box. So Kim, I think you would like to answer that question. And then for the others, you can type in your question in the Q&A box or raise your hand if you have any question or comments regarding this workshop. So Kim?
Okay, great. Let me start with reading that comment, which is at Counterculture Labs, the environmental remediation group announced the main pollutant inside the lab was the PCB that comes from tire dust. This indicates emissions and tire pollution may be present to disadvantaged areas and more widely represented than on the map. Also, damages to communities are still higher with the extended deadlines. So thank you for your comment. I did want to note that, so historically, the pollutants that have driven the most health risk cancer risk, et cetera, from trucking have definitely been diesel particulate matter. So the small particles that are formed during combustion of the diesel fuel. But it's definitely true that as those emissions are controlled through standards like the Omnibus standards and through efforts to turn over the fleet to zero emission vehicles, that other pollutants become more significant. And so there is a lot of attention being paid to both brake wear emissions and tire wear emissions to make sure, we understand them and can control them as well. I'm going to drop into the chat a recent study that CARB sponsored looking at brake and tire wear emissions. One thing to note is that zero emission vehicles, in addition to having no tailpipe emissions, battery zero emission vehicles also tend to have lower brake wear emissions because of the regenerative braking that they use. So that's another benefit from those. And then just generally, we certainly share the commenters' concern about, health risks from air pollution in disadvantaged communities, and that's part of the reason that we set up these provisions for funding projects just in disadvantaged communities, because that's definitely kind of where we want to focus first. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I'm popping a link to the CARB's new vehicle and engine certification page into the chat for folks that are interested in seeing that.
Looks like, Neva, we have a question from Michael from the Q&A box. It's about the Moyer program. So like the Moyer program, can this program be used as a match for other CARB or CEC funded programs as long as we comply with other criteria? Do you want to take?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so I'm not familiar with the requirements for other CEC programs specifically, but if you want to co-fund, you have to make sure that you follow the requirements and provisions for that program. And so if the CEC program does allow stacking or co-funding with then I don't see a problem with that. Same with the Carl Moyer program, you will have to comply with all of the requirements within the Carl Moyer program if you share or co-fund there.
Then we got a question from Eric Philly in the Q&A box. Can you provide some more information on how demonstrated need for infrastructure could be documented with public infrastructure projects?
Yeah, I can take this. And so I think we're open to hearing what you think, how you could document. But I was considering if you were to consider maps of other stations and fill in gaps between stations or where there's a high need of zero emission trucks traveling and not a lot of infrastructure. And so there are some utilities available online that provide the location of heavy duty charging. And so that might be a resource to use as well.
Then we got another question from Sam Howe. Would CARB consider credit multipliers for zero emission projects? Kim, would you like to? Yeah.
Sure, I can take this one. And I think Sam Cow is with the South Coast Air District. Thanks for being here today. The key thing is we just have to be able to show that the emission increases from the legacy engines are being offset. So we couldn't do anything in terms of credit multipliers that would mean we're like overstating the NOx benefits of the of the program. So that's kind of what it comes down to. I don't know if other folks have anything to add in response to that.
Okay, looks like we have one more question in the Q&A. So it's from Eric. Do projects qualify for offsets that are within the disadvantaged community areas that produce lower emissions and lower carbon renewable fuels, such as renewable natural gas and ethanol?
Yeah, I can take that. So if there's a quantified NOx benefit, then I think that would be a viable project we would consider. If the low carbon renewable fuels or the facility producing that could prove a NOx benefit, then I think we would consider it.
Okay, another question here from Brad from New Flyer. Not related to the projects, but a question on slide 9. The model year 20, maybe Christian, we can go back to slide 9, please. The model year 2023 engine manufacturer EOs, we don't currently display a NOx FTP, FEL, but rather the standard, the cert level and the NTE level. Will the 2024 engine EOs be showing a NOx FEL by the engine manufacturer, or will the cert level used for the deficit calculation?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Mitzi. I think for calculating the deficits, we will use the FELs. And I'm not sure, Brad, you could reach out to us later. Our understanding is that the FELs are shown in the EOs. So if you have any issues finding those, we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you later. But cert level will not be used. It will be the FEL.
Thanks, Paul. We have a question from Andrea Brown. The approximation in the cost limit for purchase credits is not simple to extrapolate across the medium heavy duty or to heavy duty due to the wide range of CF values that are used. Is there additional clarity available? I think Paul would like to answer this as well.
Yes, I would. And my recommendation is that you take a look at the final statement of reasons for the Omnibus regulation, pages 478 to 479. The basic guideline that we plan to use for other intended service classes is to look at 20% of the average cost for a 2021 model year engine. So that's the guideline that we'll be using. Again, that's sort of stated on page 478 and 479 of the final statement of reasons, the original Omnibus regulation.
Okay, we have another question from Adriana Hernandez. These projects will be used to offset emissions from legacy engines. Will there be a radius cap? In other words, will the local community have priority to funds, Eva?
Yeah, so the legacy engine provisions are explicit in that the projects have to benefit disadvantaged communities, and so we are using the official disadvantaged community designations as our boundaries. And then the benefit, and I talked about this in the presentation, but the infrastructure or the project would have to be either registered, domiciled, or located within the disadvantaged community to consider benefit, or the vehicles or equipment that utilize the infrastructure would have to, or the vehicles or equipment that are replaced would have to operate at least 50% of the time within the community. So it could be located out, the project could be located outside of the disadvantaged community as long as it operates at least 50% or more within the community. And in the case of buses, the requirement is that the bus have at least one stop or station within the community. And so it doesn't have to actually be domiciled in the community as long as it has at least one station or stop. I think that answers that question. If not, please ask again. Please clarify.
Okay. Kim, I think you would like to answer a follow-up comment from KO. I believe, sorry if I mispronounce your name or
Yeah, me
not
too. I'm
sure,
not sure how to
sorry.
pronounce that. Okay, so they commented traffic calming, arterial blocking projects locally are not offset by cleaner, more efficient mass transportation, resulting in increased road rage. Could solutions to that problem be considered for offsets? And yeah, I mean, we're really open to any kind of creative idea as long as it can be documented clearly that it reduces NOx emissions. So we've presented some examples here, some types of projects that are commonly funded in the Moyer program, just to give manufacturers ideas. But if folks have other ideas, we're certainly open to that as well.
We don't have any hands raised, but we have some more questions in the Q&A box. So let's continue on the Q&A box. So we have a question from Marilu Gosselin. Sorry again if I mispronounce your name. The link in the chat doesn't seem to lead directly to the study on breakware particulate matter emissions, just the summary.
I can take that one. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that study is likely still underway, and that's why there's not a link there to the final report. But Marilu, if you or anyone else wants to drop your email into the Q&A, I can circle with the folks in our research division that are working on that project and get you a update on the current status.
Thanks, Kim. And then we have another question from Brandon. What is the anticipated timeline for approval of a project? Would it be 1 month, 6 months, 5 years? How long after project approval would it be expected to be started? How long after project completion might credits be granted?
I'll take that question. So we anticipate 15 to 30 calendar days to do initial review of the project plan, and then we anticipate additional 40 to 60 days for full review and approval of the project plan. So that equates to 30 plus 60 is 90 calendar days, so three months. And then the second part of the question is, I assume these engines will remain in the field over 5 years. Yes, but the legacy engine provisions are explicit in that emission reductions have to be offset within 5 years. And so although emission reductions may continue through the entire life of the equipment, we're only considering 5 years of surplus of credit. Let me see, actual useful life. I think that covers that question. Please write again if I didn't quite cover it.
And then I think Neva would like to answer Inder Paul Singh question. So maybe Christian, we can go back to slide 21, please. Can you help in understanding the rationale for 50% actual useful life in example NOx credit calculation for on-road engine? I assume these engines will remain in the field for over 5 years.
Yes, so as I said before, the legacy engine provisions are explicit in that offsets we consider the offsets that happen within 5 years. They have to happen within 5 years. All the emissions have to be offset within 5 years. And the useful life of a vehicle is 10 years, and it's for the warranty miles, the useful life miles. And so we take half of that value when we're calculating benefit. And I guess another way to look at this is, you know, when we're looking at these on-road projects, we're considering scrap and replace. And so an old vehicle is scrapped and a new vehicle takes its place. It wouldn't be reasonable to assume a brand new vehicle would be scrapped. Not all of its usage, all of its life is surplus. And so in the absence of a rule or regulation defining the surplus period, we're proposing to use half of the useful life to assume for a surplus. But I think it is true to say that the vehicle will remain operational beyond the 5 years.
Okay, thanks, Neva. So we have a question from Nasreen Johnson. Is there a document or place where I can find additional details for infrastructure projects?
I don't have additional documents. I think the calculator is to quantify emission reduction benefits for infrastructure. I'd look to the calculator. There are additional information, additional documents online. I think there's a guidance document for the A-Fleet CFI calculator, and I believe there's like a training video on how to use it is available as well. But for this workshop and for the MAC, I don't have additional information on infrastructure projects besides what I presented here. Kim, do you have anything to add there?
Nope.
Okay, thanks, Neva. So we have another question from Glenn Hedsey. How will CARB handle situations whereby at the 5-year mark, there is not 100% emission offset for approved projects? Will CARB pursue enforcement actions? After all, CARB would have approved the project before it ever commences.
I can take that one, and Kim, if you'd like to chime in later, by all means, feel free to do so. So this program, again, looking at it, it basically provides flexibility to engine manufacturers that have sold legacy engines. And they're trying to look at means and pathways to offset those emissions. If they're not able to remediate, 100% of those emissions, then you basically end up in a situation where what that means is that you've sold a number of engines, which you've not, offset the emissions for those. So basically, those number of engines would be considered as non-compliant engines. And yes, those would be subject to enforcement action. That's sort of a simplistic way of looking at it. I don't know, Kim, if you want to add any more. And the details of these, if you're not able to remedy these emissions deficits, is actually spelled out in the regs within the Omnibus regulation.
Yeah, no, great answer, Paul. And I would just add, just like with any situation where there's non-compliance, we can't comment in advance about exactly how that will be handled. There's always a lot of details of the situation that have to be considered. So, but thanks for the question.
We don't see any hands raised or questions or comments in the Q&A box. There's still an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments. You can wait for a few minutes. Oh, there. I see a hand raise from Eric. I will allow. Oh, I will allow you to talk. I'm going to unmute you. Please begin asking your question.
Good morning. Thank you very much for today's presentation. My name is Eric McAfee. I'm the chairman, CEO, and founder of Omnibus. We're the largest biofuel producer in California for certain of these fuels. And we're also investing about $400 million in renewable natural gas production in the state. We operate exclusively in the disadvantaged community areas that are on the map. And so we're kind of curious about your thinking about how project developers that are going to be reducing NOx and other emissions to help engine manufacturers are going to be transacting with engine manufacturers. Do you have the concept that this would end up being a transferable credit, such as a low carbon fuel standard credit structure, or are you thinking it would be like a direct project investment scenario and then allocate certain emissions reductions to the engine manufacturers? Have you guys thought through that part of the process?
I can talk a little bit about that. So again, this is a program that basically allows engine manufacturers to offset their deficits. Now, within the engine manufacturer community, if you're a certifying manufacturer, there's a possibility to transfer credits or do trading between manufacturers. That's part of the program. And actually, if you look at the first step to remedy any kind of deficits is to use credits from zero emission vehicles or zero emission powertrains. So each engine manufacturer that has accumulated this deficit has the opportunity to reach out to other OEMs or other manufacturers to purchase those credits to offset their deficits. So there is trading available, but it's sort of limited to entities that generate those credits or use those credits.
And I can just add, so there's nothing like, LCFS credits involved. So, manufacturers will be coming in to us saying, we're planning to sell this many legacy engines, so we're going to have this many megagrams of NOx to offset. Here's our plan for how we're going to do that. And then they'll be documenting to us that those actions were taken and the NOx was offset. And, it'll be up to them to figure out how they're paying for that and how to confidently document that the reductions really occurred.
Is there an expectation of any public disclosure of these obligations for the purpose of project developers such as ourselves to have those discussions, or do you expect them to be basically just private disclosures among engine manufacturers and project developers?
I will answer that one. Yes, historically, all that information has been treated as confidential information, and that would continue to be there. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now, I might say that an engine manufacturer itself, they will, of course, reach out to other parties to explore possibilities, so that information could be part of that discussion. But as an agency, CARB, we're not going to be releasing, the deficits.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And I guess I would just add, if you have ideas for projects, like if you're thinking, oh, the manufacturer should fund this, and I could help them do that, please reach out to Neva Lowry, because we can definitely try to kind of facilitate connecting the folks we know who are going to have a need to do projects and folks that have ideas for projects that could be done.
Good. Thank you very much for that reference.
We received another question from Andrea Brown, and I think Neva would like to answer that question.
It says perhaps some additional clarity on timeline for being able to use credits for offset. From the earlier statement, final approval is approximately 90 days. With the final approval, are credits from the project valid for use from that date? Let's see, that just shifted. And then more recent comment, there are consequences if the intended balance is not met. So the project plan should have a start and end date. And so once the project is approved and the 5-year time period starts when the emission reduction project is operational. And so the 90 days is for review of the proposed plan that the manufacturer submits to CARB for executive office approval. And then that plan should have a start and end date. And then the emission reductions timeline for 5 years starts when that project is operational. So if it's an ag tractor that's replaced when that new ag tractor is operating, then it's 5 years from then.
Thanks, Neva. So we have another question from Kayo. I hope I pronounced it correctly this time. So currently CPUC is entertaining PG&E proposals that have potential to squash adoption of off-road and on-road EV use via fee schedules. And can CARB interact with CPUC so agency individuals can work together? Kim?
I can take this one. Yeah. So CARB, although the authority for infrastructure and for utility oversight does not sit with CARB, it sits with CPUC and CEC. The provision of charging infrastructure is super important for the success of our programs. And so we have set up a infrastructure team at CARB that's interacting with CPUC and the individual utilities. So they're definitely on the job. They're trying to make sure that all the things happen that will work out to make rules like the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule and the Zero Emission Forklift Rule successful.
Thanks, Kim. And then Christian, can you scroll over at the last slide for the contact information? I know we received some questions about the contact slide. So as shown in the screen, here's the contact for NEVA for this workshop, as well as if you have any other question, you can send it to the loannox@arb.ca.gov. A lot of us from the Omnibus team can receive that email and we will respond to you. So as of this time, there's no more question in the Q&A box, nor hand raised.
Can we go back to the question slides and just take a look at that, see if anybody has any additional comments on our questions? Any additional comments or questions about what we proposed? Any additional possible projects that we're not aware of that you would like for us to consider? And then specifically for infrastructure, are there any general criteria we should, require, not require for infrastructure? And then as far as emission reduction calculations, do you have any input on what to consider when calculating emission reductions from infrastructure projects?
And if anyone has suggestions or answers to this and they prefer to speak to us privately or the ideas come to you after this workshop is over, please do reach out to Neva and we're happy to speak individually. Oh, got a hand up.
I see Andrea Brown's hand. I will unmute you now. There we go. Let me begin. Andrea? You're unmuted.
We can't hear you, Andrea, if you're talking. Have you unmuted yourself or? Sorry, we can't hear you.
Let's try again. There you go. Hopefully this time your mic is unmuted and you may begin. We cannot hear you.
Maybe you can type your question in the Q&A chat.
So I will lower your hand, Andrea, but yeah, you can type your question in the Q&A or let's try it again. So we received another question from Alexander Newman. For project infrastructure projects, has any thought been put into maintaining the installed infrastructure after the 5-year reporting deadline? Perhaps that could be one of the eligibility criteria. Thank you for this presentation.
Yeah, thanks. That's I'll definitely make a note of that. That's a great suggestion about providing guidance on long-term maintenance of the facility after its 5-year period is up, offset period is up.
I'd also like to chime in. We had a question before about whether like the megagrams of NOx that manufacturers have to offset, if that's public information. And Paul and Nani described, no, that's confidential information. But I did want to point out that the list of manufacturers who certify and sell engines in California is public. You can just check our certification website for that. So that would give, if folks have project ideas, that would give you an idea of who might be interested in funding your project.
Thanks, Kim. So we received a question from Andrea now. So infrastructure suggests no additional restrictions due to the complexities we are already facing with building infrastructure.
All right, note taken. Thanks.
So we don't see any hand raised or new questions in the Q&A box. So as Kim mentioned, you can reach out to Neva, or you can also email us at the LONOX email if you have any questions or additional comments.
All right, thanks. I think that's it. Just to close out, thanks everyone for joining the presentation today, the workshop. I appreciate your input, and the next steps for us are to continue to coordinate with people who want to provide feedback and put together a guidance document called a MAC, and then we'll be working on that. And then please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional comments or suggestions. And as Mitzi said, the last slide provides contact information. Anything you want to close out, Kim? Or?
No, just echo your thanks. It was a great discussion today. And yeah, let us know if you have more thoughts or questions as you think about this further on your own. Have a great day.
Everyone, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.